Los Angeles Pacific Martial Arts Academy, October 1968. A moment that exists in fragments. One witness swore it lasted 4 seconds. Another insisted on 7. A ballet instructor in the third row admitted she stopped breathing entirely and couldn't recall when she started. Here, what's undisputed. A 147-kilogram man walked onto that stage as a towering certainty and left it as a different person. And no one helped him back to his feet because no one realized he was down. What you're about to see actually happened in a room full of witnesses. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop a comment. Has anyone ever dismissed you so completely that, in that instant, you learn something profound about yourself? Leave a like. Let's begin. That October evening, the Ambassador Hotel's conference room holds around 300 people. Most are martial arts instructors, tournament promoters, sports journalists, and wealthy sponsors who believe they're underwriting the future of American combat sports. Chairs form a semicircle around a small central platform. The organizers have invited Bruce Lee as a guest of honor. The official reason: a demonstration of Jeet for a community that increasingly murmurs about his system behind closed doors. The unofficial reason is simpler: they want to see for themselves if the stories are true. Among the invitees, sitting 3 rows from the back, is a man who fits in neither by appearance nor temperament. His name is Earl Bodden, 34 years old, 193 centimeters tall, 147 kilograms of solid muscle forged through 11 years of heavy lifting, 2 seasons of professional football, and regular workouts at a Venice beach gym. His face is flat and broad like an open hand. His neck is thicker than an average man's thigh. His hands seem to belong to someone else, someone made of different material than the rest of humanity. Bodden is here only because a friend brought him. He didn't seek out the martial arts community or its fighting philosophies. He came because he heard he could see a Chinese man who was supposedly fast. Earl Bodden likes fast people. He likes watching speed collide with mass to see what emerges. He sits with arms crossed, one leg resting on the opposite knee, his face slightly angled toward the exit as though he'd rather not be there. Bruce Lee steps onto the stage unannounced. 168 centimeters, 63 kilograms, 38 years old, though he appears younger. He wears black pants and a dark short-sleeved shirt. No ceremonial gi, no bowing ritual, no background music. He enters like a man walking into a room too small for him, immediately scanning for the right place to stand. For the first few minutes he speaks. He explains what Jeet is not a system, not a style, not a collection of techniques to memorize. It's a way of thinking about movement, timing, and the space between 2 bodies. He says this calmly, without seeking validation from his audience, like someone repeating a truth for himself. In the 3rd row from the back, Earl Bodden leans to his friend and mutters something, the only audible word being ballet. Several nearby attendees hear it, but don't react. Then the demonstration begins. Bruce requests a volunteer. A karate instructor from Pasadena, Davis, steps onto the platform. Over the next 4 minutes, Bruce shows how to respond to an attack that hasn't yet arrived. Davis attacks. Bruce doesn't block. He slips away, angles into spaces Davis didn't anticipate, because no one trains that way, no one thinks that way. Twice, 4 times, 8. Davis leaves the stage with the face of a man recalculating a formula that suddenly doesn't match a decade of his own teaching. Bruce asks for 2 volunteers at once. No one in the room understands why. They approach from left and right. For 37 seconds, Vivian from the 3rd row will later describe this as time that stopped moving. Nobody can articulate what they're watching. 2 attackers fail to land a single strike. Bruce doesn't run, doesn't leap, doesn't perform anything classifiable as combat. He moves like fluid among solids, like something whose shape depends entirely on whatever obstacle it encounters. The room is silent. Earl Bodden now sits with both feet on the floor. His arms stay folded, but his head has shifted. He's watching. This is the moment everyone will later interpret differently. Vivian will say she saw something on Bodden's face she couldn't name, perhaps anger, perhaps unease, perhaps something simpler and deeper, something without a clean label because it rarely happens. The sudden sense that a deeply held belief is abruptly in question. Organizer Frank Callahan will recall seeing Bodden straighten in his chair, briefly resembling someone who wants to stand but waits for someone else to go first. No one moves, so Bodin rises alone. Hey, his voice lands like a stone in still water. The room turns toward him. That's pretty, seriously, but that's dancing. Those two guys aren't touching him because they're not really trying. Silence. Bruce Lee stands on the platform. He doesn't respond. He watches. I would touch him. Someone in the crowd inhales sharply. Several heads turn, others remain frozen, wearing expressions of people waiting for something to happen but not wanting to be part of what's about to. Frank Callahan gets up from his spot against the wall, too late. Bodin is already moving. He walks through the row of chairs with the peculiar slowness of large men, not courtesy, not reluctance, just the conviction that nothing requires haste because everything will be in its place anyway. He steps onto the stage and faces Bruce Lee, 147 kilograms against 63, 193 centimeters against 168. At the back of the room, someone whispers something in English that sounds like a prayer, though it isn't one. Show me that for real, if you can. Bruce Lee looks at him for perhaps 2 seconds, perhaps 3. His face is calm, not the calm of controlled emotions, but the calm of someone who has nothing to control. He says, okay, one word. The room holds its breath. Type strength without knowledge in the comments if you're with us. Stick around to the end. Bodin plants his feet wide apart. He raises his hands loosely, smiling faintly, the smile of someone confident but careful not to appear overconfident. He looks at Bruce Lee and sees what he's seen from the start, a small man in a dark shirt doing elegant things for spectators. He sees lightness, which for Bodin equals fragility. He sees lack of mass, which for Bodin equals lack of power. In Bodin's mind is a simple worldview built over 11 years in gyms, 2 football seasons, and countless conversations around barbells with other large men. In this model, strength is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is straightforward. More mass equals more force equals more control. Everything else is tactics for those without alternatives. Bruce Lee doesn't attack, he stands still. Bodin steps forward. Bruce moves back exactly the same distance. No drama, no defensive posture, motion like breathing. Bodin stops. Something about that retreat is wrong. He expected rigidity, a wall, someone who would brace and defend. Instead, there's fluidity that confuses because its target is invisible. A second step. Bruce shifts left. A third step, faster. Bruce is no longer where Bodin aimed. He's 2 positions to the side, his body angled so that Bodin's silhouette suddenly appears wide, open, predictable. Bodin halts again. The room is as quiet as an operating theater. Then Bodin attacks for real. Not an experiment, not a test, a full motion. 147 kilograms launched forward with force that could be measured in newtons, but is better described as something that leaves a mark on any wall it strikes. Second one, Bodin shoots his right arm in a straight line toward the head. Because large men attack in straight lines, they learn that the straight line is the shortest distance, and the shortest distance is authority. Bruce Lee doesn't go left or right. He drops at a 45-degree angle, rotating through his hips rather than his shoulders. His entire displacement happens in a span no one could time. Bodin's fist passes through air where Bruce's head existed a fraction of a second earlier. Bodin loses balance by a centimeter, just one. But 1 centimeter at 147 kilograms in motion is not 1 centimeter. It's a shift of the center of gravity that, for an instant, turns this enormous body into something surprisingly vulnerable. Second 2, Bruce Lee neither strikes nor blocks. He places his left palm gently on Bodin's right shoulder, not a push, barely contact, but the contact aligns precisely where Bodin's center of gravity is momentarily unstable, directing him that 1 extra centimeter further in the direction his body was already tilting. Physics is unforgiving. Bodin senses something wrong, but doesn't know what, and doesn't yet realize he doesn't know. Second 3, Bruce's right hand is now at Bodin's wrist. He doesn't grip, he guides. The difference between gripping and gidding is the difference between resistance and flow. And Bodin, who spent 11 years learning to fight resistance, has no defense against flow. His large body begins doing something large bodies rarely do. It loses orientation relative to space. Second 4, no strike, no throw. Just an instant where 147 kilograms, built upward over 11 years, suddenly discovers that gravity pulls downward, and someone has very precisely removed anything that could prevent that outcome. Earl Bodden is on his knees, with no memory of how he got there. The room doesn't react for perhaps 2 seconds. Then someone at the back exhales audibly, breaking the spell. Others begin breathing, and a murmur rises. Vivian in the third row realizes her hands are clenched on her knees and her fingers ache. Earl Bodden kneels on the platform, face down. Bruce Lee stands 2 steps away. He doesn't gloat. He doesn't look at the audience. He watches Bodden with the expression of someone waiting for another person to be ready. Bodden lifts his head. His face shows none of what everyone expected. No anger, no shame, no aggression seeking a second round. Something else, something Vivian later describes as the face of a man recalculating a formula. He rises slowly, straightens. For a moment he stands opposite Bruce Lee, and no one in the room knows what happens next. Then Bodden speaks quietly, only for Bruce. "How did you do that?" Bruce Lee looks at him, then turns to the room and begins speaking, not to Bodden, but to everyone, though every word answers Bodden's question. He says, "Strength alone is a tool, and like any tool, it's useless if you don't understand what you're doing with it. A knife in the hands of someone who doesn't understand cooking is a danger to himself." He says, "Bodden's body is like a great stone, strong, enduring, but a stone has one problem. It cannot change direction mid-path. Water can. Wind can, a man who understands his body can." He says, what Bodden experienced as falling to the floor was, in reality, his own force turned against him. Bodden didn't lose to Bruce Lee. He lost to physics that no one had ever explained to him. "Your strength is real. It's the greatest strength in this room." He says this calmly, without irony. But strength without awareness is an engine without a steering wheel. It goes fast, but no one knows where. The room falls silent. Earl Bodden stands in the center of the platform and listens. Something shifts in him, invisible to the naked eye, but visible in how he stands. No longer so broad, no longer with arms folded, no longer with the face of a man who knows everything. He stands like someone who just received new information and is trying to fit it into an existing worldview. That worldview must expand. Frank Callahan, the organizer, will recount this years later over dinner with a group of instructors. He'll say Bodden asked afterward if he could come to a training session once, just to observe. Bruce told him he could, but not because of what he saw that night. He should come only if he understood why what he saw mattered. Bodden came 2 weeks later once, and that one visit changed how he coached his athletes for years. Not Jeet Kune, he lacked patience and aptitude for it, but body awareness, center of gravity, the difference between force and control. That's what he taught, what he learned in 4 seconds on the Ambassador Hotel stage. There are things you can't understand while sitting down. Bodden grasped it through his own lens, the lens of mass, weight, physical space. He thought that was enough. He thought knowing how much he weighed gave him knowing of what he was. Bruce Lee understood differently. He understood that the body isn't identical to the part you see in the mirror, that strength doesn't reside in muscles alone. It lives in the relationship between muscle and thought, between body and moment, between movement and what happens a fraction of a second later. He used to say, "Don't focus on the finger pointing at the moon, or you'll miss all that heavenly glory." Bodden looked at the finger. Most of us look at the finger, at weight, height, muscles, resumes, bank accounts, achievements, everything visible, measurable, comparable, and mistake the finger for the moon. That evening in Los Angeles, Bruce Lee didn't defeat a stronger man. He showed him that the question, who is stronger, is wrongly posed. The real question is, do you understand the strength you have? If you made it this far, write "strength without knowledge" in the comments. I want to know how many of you are truly here. It wasn't the first time someone stood before Bruce Lee believing size was enough. It wasn't the last. But that October evening in Los Angeles was remembered by everyone in those chairs. They remembered the silence after Bodden landed on his knees. They remembered the calm voice that immediately began explaining physics. Vivian, the ballet instructor, said 2 decades later that this was the first time she understood why she teaches dance, that it's not about how you look doing a pirouette. It's about knowing where in space you are. Bruce Lee died 5 years after that evening. Earl Bodden lived long, teaching at his Venice Beach gym until age 70. On his wall was one sentence, printed on a sheet of paper, taped above the training scoreboard: "Engine without a steering wheel." None of his athletes knew where it came from. He did.